Talofa, whakalofalai atu, maloli lei, kia orana, kia ora, olavanaka, and warm Pacific greetings. I am humbled as well as honoured to be asked to speak to you all today, a task I was initially apprehensive about, however an opportunity I'm very glad that I accepted. When I first met with Monique to discuss LAVAR and their work, she did mention a conference in the new year, and she mentioned if I would like to be involved. She first said, you just can come along and sit in the crowd. Then she said, oh, it'll just be a few questions and answers. And then it was, can you speak for an hour or so? And by the way, you'll be following some world-renowned scholars and authors and leaders in their fields. I then asked Monique, how many people come to these conferences? Oh, it varies, but sometimes 30 or 40. Obviously, mathematics was not one of her strong subjects at school. If I wasn't nervous about speaking today already, my anxiety was compounded last night when a radio station rang me to ask me some questions about the conference. The host started by saying, so I guess you'll be talking about orthopedic congenital deformities and orthopedic infections and how they affect our Pacific Island people. It sounded like she knew more orthopedics than I did. I said, no. Right, so you must be going to talk about the mental health issues and addictions and how they affect our people. What have you got to comment about that? And I'm going, oh man, this is going really badly. I said, I don't have a lot to comment about those things actually. So then there was a silence and she then asked, so what are you going to talk about? I then told her that I was asked to talk about my own personal journey and how I got to where I am and if I encountered any obstacles along the way. There was a silence, to which she replied, oh well, I can't wait to hear what Professor Betancourt has to say. So I apologise in advance if this talk isn't what you expected. With that said, I would like to take some time just to shed some light on my background. I was born and raised in New Zealand. My father, Joseph, is Samoan, and my beautiful mother, Evelyn, is Niuean. My parents were both New Zealand born and cannot speak Samoan or Niuean. I am the eldest of 6 with 4 sisters and a brother. I am now married to Anna and I'm a father to 3 children of my own, Jaya, 5, Nico 3 and Zach having turned 1. Zach's only 6 weeks old in that photo, he's not a midget. When I began to think about the main reasons as to why I've been able to achieve some of my dreams, it is no secret that my family have played the most integral role. Firstly, my parents, and especially my mother, and now my wife and family have provided me with a solid foundation to build on. If you look at the conference title, GPS or Growing Pacific Solutions for Our Families, then the key word for me is families. Now, it's not my place to provide those solutions, and certainly there are more highly qualified people to evoke thought and debate about the problems facing our Pacific families. But what I essentially hope to convey is the fundamental necessity of a strong familial structure without which life is made exponentially harder. Of course, it all starts with genetics, and you can only thank 2 people for that, unless you were genetically modified and grown in a lab. My mother will concede that my sporting ability comes predominantly from my Samoan side. But in her mind, the intellectualism is all Niuean. So I guess I was lucky in the sense that I was blessed with the genes to be able to play sport. Now this was reinforced to me by a man called Jim Blair, who was a famous fitness trainer with the Auckland rugby teams in the 80s and 90s. I saw him as a promising young rugby player for a training program, and he asked me what made me a good rugby player. I thought for a while and I said I wasn't sure, and he said it was simple. It was due to my parents. He then pointed out that everything I'd achieved in sport up to that point was due to genetics. He then said that genetics would only get me so far and that the rest was up to me. Now that always has stuck with me, as I've played with many gifted athletes as I grew up. many who are a lot more naturally gifted than myself, but who never went on to fulfill their potential. I am one of the luckier ones in the sense that my family afforded me every chance to fulfill whatever potential I had, inherited through genetics. Now, we weren't a wealthy family by any stretch, but we never went without, and I never felt I missed out on any opportunities. There was a never-ending list of sporting equipment and fees to pay for: rugby boots, softball bats and gloves, karate suits, athletic gear, training equipment, tennis rackets, and all manner of lessons. But my parents never made these costs feel like a burden and encouraged me to dabble in anything in sport that I took a fancy to. The rugby league was my main sport when I was really young, and I played for Ponsonby from the tender age of 3. There are rumours my league uniform didn't need washing that whole first season, as I was more interested in picking the flowers on the field than actually playing in the game. But the unrelenting support of my family is exemplified through the less than ideal transport arrangements we made just to get to my trainings. My mother would take my sister Crystal and I on the bus from Panmure on the east side of town where we lived into the city, and then get on another bus to get to Ponsonby. We would then catch the buses all the way back to Panmure, often in the freezing rain. My mother couldn't drive back then, and we only had one car for the family, and it is only in reflection now that I've come to truly appreciate the lengths she went through to ensure I had the best. I'm happy to say my mum has learnt to drive in more recent years, and now she is forever in her car, driving all over Auckland, collecting all her grandchildren and whisking them away, sometimes for days and usually without wanting to return them. Although I travelled halfway across Auckland to play rugby league for Ponsonby, I went to the local schools in my town of upbringing, Panmure Bridge Primary and Tamaki Intermediate. Both are Decile 1 schools, which I have to admit didn't mean a lot to me until recently, when my wife and I were looking for schools for our own daughter to attend. In saying that, I have nothing but fond memories of my time at both those schools. And this brings me to another important reason as to why I was able to turn some of my dreams into a reality: my teachers. I was very fortunate to have been taught by some fantastic teachers right throughout my schooling career. And I can still remember their names: Miss Campbell, Mr. Peterson, Miss Kavanagh, Mrs. McGavin. Actually, I only remember her because she gave me the strap, so I should take her off that list. Mr. Gilbert, Mrs. Risto, Mr. Nixon. Now, these are the teachers I felt comfortable with about sharing my dream of becoming a doctor one day, to which they offered nothing but encouragement. They would often give me extra work and projects to work on just so that I didn't get bored in class. It saddens me that Tamaki Intermediate has recently shut down because of a declining school roll. I remember when I told a teacher there I wanted to get into Auckland Grammar without the help of my father, who was at the time in the All Blacks and had just been part of the team that won the inaugural Rugby World Cup. I was told quite emphatically that I should use every opportunity and means to get into grammar. I took his advice and was duly accepted as an out-of-zone pupil. My first day at grammar was daunting for many reasons, the most obvious being the harsh fact that I was one of very few brown faces in the mass of students in the school. Because there were not many of us, we naturally gravitated together. I joined the Samoan cultural group in my third form and was proud to perform in front of the school each year. Now, there is a vast difference between performing in front of 1,800 white faces who don't know what you're supposed to sound or look like on stage. You can sing the wrong words and do the wrong actions and go the wrong way and still get a standing ovation. Compared this to performing at the cultural festivals against schools like Auckland Girls Grammar, De La Salle College, Kelston Boys Grammar, and that wasn't much fun at all. But we turned up each year and we tried the best we could. Auckland Grammar provided me with some amazing opportunities. School trips up until my third form year had merely consisted of bus trips to the museum or the zoo or Motat. And sports trips usually meant a drive down to Huntly to play Waikato in league. At Grammar, I was lucky enough to go on sports trips to Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, Australia, and Japan. I even got to travel to Samoa for the first time with our Samoan cultural group. The other thing I learnt quickly at grammar was that there was always someone better than me at something, by virtue of the simple fact that the school attracted some of the best athletes and brightest students in the country. I came from an intermediate where I was the school Ducks, head boy and winner of the sports award, all of which landed me in the D class. At grammar we were streamed from A to about K in those days, with the A stream containing the best and brightest students. I started in 3D and was devastated by this. But grammar is a school that rewards results. We had exams at the end of every term for every year I was at that school. They had no qualms about promoting you up into a better class if your diligence and hard work were reflected in your results. However, you would be just as easily moved down classes if your results were less than ideal. This system of meritocracy taught me at 13, results come with hard work and perseverance. I managed to work my way into 4A by the start of the 4th form year, and that is where I stayed until my 7th form. As well as striving for academic excellence, grammar also prides itself on the array of sporting achievement that it is nationally renowned for. This was a change for me again, coming from schools where we struggled to compete, and we were happy if one of our students won one race or event, or one person got picked in an Auckland team. Suddenly it seemed like my school won everything, and we had champions in all types of sports and events. And not only were they the best in Auckland, but we also had teams and athletes who were the best in the country. But like our country, it seemed the mood of the school and indeed its success for the year were dependent on the results of the school first 15. The first 15 seemed like men to me when I was in the 3rd form. They were our school heroes and could do nothing wrong in our eyes. For most of those guys, day-to-day school life was merely a buffer between trainings and the game on the weekend. However, the guys I looked up to were the ones who excelled in sport as well as performed in the classroom. And these were the boys that I tried to emulate. Which brings me to another important factor in achieving success, having positive role models and mentors. Ken Lotuinga, brother of our national MP Sam, was head boy and captain of the first 15. He was Samoan. Kara Waitford, captain of the cricket first 11 and soccer 11 and head boy. He was Māori. Cameron Taylor, New Zealand sprint champ, head boy 7A. Johnny Grant, captain soccer first 11, head boy 7A. I would go on to become deputy head boy. I played in the first 15 for 3 years and captained them in my last year to the New Zealand and Auckland Championship. Med school. The hardest thing about medical school is getting in. If I thought it was hard to get in then, it seems almost impossible nowadays. I was determined to get into med school on the general admission scheme and not on the Maori and Pacific Island admission scheme, or MAPAS scheme as it is known. Again, I was advised to use all possible means to get into medical school, and that MAPAS would be my best option. At the time, I thought it was grossly unfair that I should get preferential entry into medical school, especially given some of my friends from grammar who were smarter than me hadn't made it in. I remember the extreme guilt I felt. But as I've progressed through medical school and worked as a doctor, I've come to learn that the best doctors are not the ones who got the highest marks in bursary. I have struggled with this idea of being entitled to opportunities in life because I was of Samoan and Niuean descent. In some respect, I wanted to make it in the world on my own merits, but on the other hand, there were all these Pacific Island scholarships and opportunities available. For example, in my 6th form year, I won the Pacific Island Bursary Scholar of the Year, got the highest marks combined in bursary for a Pacific Islander. No one was more surprised than I was, as I wasn't even in the top half of my 7A class. And that was just for my school, not to mention all the schools in the country who would have had students with better marks than me. I was invited to Government House, which is where these photos are taken in Wellington, to receive the award along with all the rest of the top scholars in the country. I wasn't completely sure of going, but I'm glad I did. The number of letters and flowers of congratulations from all manner of Pacific Island people was overwhelming and humbling. I had so many people come up to me, hug me, kiss me, put lace around my neck. It was not until all these strangers were telling me how proud they were when I realized it wasn't really about me, but it was about the recognition of Pacific Islanders in the country. The $5,000 that came in was also nice. As I mentioned, the hardest thing about medical school was getting in. That's not to make light of the degree, but you were given every opportunity to pass each year, and with a little bit of hard work at the right times, you could just scrape through. This meant I was still able to play softball and rugby, which had become my two main sports. I had represented Auckland and New Zealand in softball through the age grades, and this was largely due to a famous sporting family, the Kolhasis. Eddie and Chris Kolhasi turned up on my doorstep and asked if I wanted to play softball for their under-16 team at Marist. I was 12 at the time. That's where my love affair with softball really began, and people joked that the Kolhasis were my summer family. I would spend most of my time with Chris and Eddie as I was bat boy for the senior Marist team. I graduated from bat boy to being part of the team the following year, and from then on played for Auckland and eventually New Zealand men's team. I actually played my first game of softball for Auckland senior men's team at the age of 14. I began touring the country with softball teams at this age with both Marist and Auckland. I became very serious about sport and very competitive from a very young age. I struggled with the balance between sport and everyday life simply due to a lack of maturity at the time. If I didn't play well or we'd lost, I was quite unpleasant to be around for a few days after the game. My poor family typically bore the brunt of it. It was only with age that I would come to see sport at the end of the day as just a game. I remember my dad telling me that I took my sport more seriously than he did, and at the time he was playing test matches for the All Blacks. So it is safe to say that I would get really wound up. Medicine would also help me in this regard as I got older. I would see patients and families who would go through crippling circumstances that no family should ever have to face, and it was times like these when I would remember what was really important in the grander scheme of things. Playing softball and rugby at a high level became more and more difficult simply due to the fact that the seasons began to overlap too much, and I wasn't able to commit myself to either sport as wholeheartedly as I wanted. I remember making the New Zealand softball team for a tour of the States and Canada, which also meant having to tell Graham Henry I wasn't going to be available for selection for Auckland in a couple of weeks. I don't think he even knew we had a New Zealand softball team. When I got back from that softball trip, I wasn't selected for the Auckland team again that year. The shift from rugby into a professional sport was the deciding nail in my softball coffin. I was now contracted to the rugby union, and it was now my job to be at all trainings and available for every game. Unfortunately, I had to give up playing softball. I would eventually return to softball when my rugby career ended in 2004 and was privileged to captain the Niuean Samoan softball team to 5th place in the World Series in Christchurch. A great effort given our ranking of 15 at the time. It remains one of my fondest sporting achievements. In the first year or two of professional rugby, I was still able to juggle both studies and rugby because of the free time I was given. The demands of rugby did not change a huge amount. We still only trained once a day as a team, and then only on every second day. Gym sessions were still done on your own, so I was able to do these before going to lectures or going on ward rounds. The one noticeable change, however, was the large cash injection at the end of every month. And because of this, my student loan disappeared, and I became quite popular at the student pub. I was able to get through med school in those first couple of years with a bit of forward planning and the help of some understanding classmates. If I had to be at training, my friends would let me borrow their notes for the lectures I missed. If I missed a placement in the hospital, I was allowed to make that up in the holidays. If I was away on tour during exams, I would often sit them in the hotel in whatever part of the world I was in. I sat exams in South Africa, Australia, and the UK. I once sat a 3-hour behavioural science exam and then drove straight to Eden Park to play for Auckland against Waikato. Although I played extremely poorly that day, I had played well enough during the rest of the season to earn selection in the 1997 All Black team to tour the UK. It was yet another dream come true and a very proud moment for my family. I could be wrong, but I believe my dad and I still hold the record for the shortest gap of father and son playing for the All Blacks. He had played his last game for the ABs in 1991, and I was selected in the team only 6 years later. That's taken in Wales after my debut against Llanelli. If I thought we got treated well in the Blues, it was nothing compared to becoming an All Black. The amount of gear we were given could fill an entire room. We would be invited to play golf as a team for a charity event, and were given a brand new set of golf clubs to keep. A free ski trip to Whistler in Canada, with all expenses paid, was another notable perk. It was the first and last time I have ever skied. There aren't a lot of Samoan Niueans on the slopes in Whistler. I also got a brand new Ford car to drive every 6 months. It is close to being a rock star or movie star as you can get. With all the excitement and hype, there were definite downsides. The amount of public scrutiny was terrifying, and the expectations placed on the team to perform were and still are enormous. I only played in the midweek team on that tour, and to be honest, I didn't play very well. But I was only 22, and it had given me a real taste of what it was like to be an All Black. I didn't realise it at the time, but injury made sure that it would be my first and last time wearing an All Black jersey. The next year, a little Fijian winger would go missing in Dunedin, and the Highlanders would be left without a back for the upcoming season. Apparently it was too cold for him down there, and he went to Fiji and didn't come back. I was asked to go to Dunedin and jumped at the opportunity. The Blues team I was in and had been training with up until then were the defending champions, but I'd only had limited time on the field the year before, so moving to the Highlanders would be an opportunity to get more game time to really press for another shot at the All Blacks. The Highlanders had finished the previous season last, so it was a big risk. I was trading in the best team for the worst. Having said that, those years spent with the Highlanders were my favourite years as a rugby player. It seemed everyone loved rugby in Dunedin, especially the doctors at the hospital. In fact, the senior doctors would turn up on the wards in the mornings and send me home early so I could rest for the upcoming game. I don't think I was very popular with the other junior doctors. I would also meet my wife-to-be in the Bowler, a famous student pub, so I should really thank that little Fijian one day. Although I got an All Black trial that year, I didn't make the team. That year was the first time I wasn't able to balance both my studies and sporting commitments. Fifth-year exams at med school were our last big exams. I just wasn't coping well with the stress that professional rugby and med school entailed, and I eventually had to ask the rugby union for special dispensation to concentrate on my studies, which luckily they let me do, so I didn't play rugby for the rest of that year. The next year was my second season with the Highlanders, and it was a World Cup year. Playing in a World Cup is the pinnacle for any rugby player, and the Highlanders were now one of the best teams in the competition. I was being touted as a good chance to make the All Blacks later that year, but just as things were looking bright, I suffered a major knee injury which would keep me out of rugby for nearly 2 years. The only silver lining from this was the fact that I could fully concentrate on medicine for a couple of years, graduate, and get my full registration. I wouldn't have been able to do this otherwise. After nearly 2 years on the injury list, I would get back on the field and play again, but this time back home with the Blues. 2 games into the NPC season, I would suffer a career-ending spinal injury. I guess it just wasn't meant to be. I was retired at the age of 25. My father had not even played his first game for the All Blacks until he was 29. I felt like I was robbed of reaching my potential in the sport, and my dream of playing for the All Blacks again was over. I didn't dwell on the fact that I couldn't play rugby for too long. I had a career to pursue, which was more than a lot of my other rugby mates had. In the early days of professionalism, we were not given much advice on our finances and career options after rugby. And so a lot of the guys who got injured or weren't selected often had very little to show for it. They got caught up in the glamour and fame and bought flash cars, Harley Davidsons, boats, jet skis, stuff like that. That was one of the pitfalls of professional rugby early on. You never thought it would end, and you felt bulletproof when you were young. Some of my friends were able to play professionally for a long time and are only now just retiring. But even they are struggling to find their way, as they've known nothing but rugby and have hardly any work experience or skills that are of value off a rugby field. Unfortunately, not everyone can be a professional coach or a rugby commentator. So you could say I was very unlucky, but also very lucky at the same time. My focus turned to medicine and eventually orthopedics. Orthopedics is a surgical specialty that deals with musculoskeletal problems. We fix broken bones and we replace your arthritic joints, that sort of thing. I chose surgery over medicine because I didn't enjoy the long ward rounds that came with medicine, and I liked the practical skills involved in surgery. I chose orthopedics because, generally speaking, people don't tend to die because of my surgery. Generally speaking. I don't know if that guy still got his foot on. The one who got eaten by the shark, anyway. Surgery, as you see in the movies or on the TV, with people being rushed through theatre with someone straddling their chest performing CPR, does not appeal to me. Give me a broken arm which has been waiting on the ward for a few hours, or sometimes days, it's happened, that gets wheeled into theatre to nice music in the background any day. Orthopedics is also very rewarding, as we can make a big impact on our patients' lives. Patients can come with debilitating pain and virtually be housebound, and we can get rid of their pain and give them back their independence. Hip joint replacement is second only to cataract surgery in terms of quality of life gained. If getting into medical school is the hardest thing about medicine, then getting on the orthopaedic training program is the major rate limiting factor in orthopedics. The criteria for getting on the program are constantly evolving, but usually it entails working as a registrar and proving that you have what it takes to make a good surgeon. This not only means working yourself into the ground, but smiling while you do it, and then asking your bosses, could they please work you harder? Apart from getting on the program, there were two major hurdles, the Part 1 and the Part 2 exam. The Part 1 is a general exam. I studied for that exam for 12 months. Up until then, I had never worked so hard in my life. I would wake at 5 a.m. and study for a couple of hours before going to work, come home and then study till 10 or 11 at night. On the weekends, I would study from 8 in the morning until 10 at night on the Saturday, and then from 7 till 12 on the Sunday, and give myself a half day off. The last couple of months, I studied all Sunday as well. We studied on top of our normal daily jobs as house surgeons, which alone can be quite tiring. I sat my Part 1 in Dunedin and got my timing wrong in the first exam and didn't answer 30 questions. There were 360 questions altogether, and I failed the exam by 1 mark. I had never failed an exam before, and it was such a public failure at that. My family, friends, work colleagues, bosses, everyone knew I was sitting this exam, and everyone knew my result. I felt so embarrassed at the time. It took me 4 weeks just to be able to pick up another book again, and I kissed another 6 months of my life goodbye as I prepared for the exam second time round. Second time I passed by over 50 marks, but I am still bitter and twisted about the point of it all. After you pass the Part 1, you are then deemed worthy of applying for the orthopaedic training program. The New Zealand program accepts about 10 new trainees every year, and these are selected from applicants all around the country, so it is extremely competitive. In saying that, I am happy to report that more and more Pacific Islanders are being selected for training. In my class, there was myself and a Rarotongan doctor called Dion Noval. Currently on the program, there are 4 more Pacific Island trainees, and hopefully a couple more to get on this year. We seem well represented in orthopaedics, but I can't comment on other surgical specialties. I joke to my bosses that the orthopaedic training program is becoming Polynesianised, just like the All Blacks. The orthopaedic training program takes 5 years to complete. It took me 3 years to get on the program, and now I have 2 years of fellowship to complete. In total, 10 years of surgical training on top of 6 years of med school and 3 years as a house surgeon. If I had been told when I left school that it would take me 19 years to get to where I am today, I wouldn't have believed it. But now I am here. I am very grateful that I persisted. I really do have a great job and one that I enjoy getting up to every day. If the part 1 was an exercise in pain, then the part 2 is an exercise of endurance. The part 2 exam is the exit exam for surgical training and the last hurdle for acceptance as a fellow of the College of Surgeons. It is a completely different exam. Firstly, unlike the part 1, it is relevant. You learn about orthopedics and stuff that actually helps you become a better surgeon. So in that respect, it is easier to study for. On the other hand, it was a lot tougher as now I had a wife and 3 children, as well as the exam to study for and a daily job to do. Undoubtedly, I have my wife to thank for the part 2. She was a solo mother for 12 months leading up to the exam. I literally lived in a separate part of the house in order to be able to study and sleep without disruption. My weekends were spent with my study group and rarely with my family. It was a horrible year. Passing that exam remains one of the most satisfying achievements in my entire life. It represented the official end of study, more sleep, but most importantly, it meant I could finally become a full-time husband and father again. Roles I know my wife Anna was just as relieved as I was in fulfilling. If we look a bit weary in that photo, it's just because we've been put through 3 days of clinical exams and we'd only just been told we'd passed. There's more relief, I think, than anything else in our faces. Now that I have finished my training, I am on fellowship. I have a year in Auckland doing sports orthopedics and then 6 months at Starship before heading to Melbourne for a year to complete some more pediatrics, and then some knee surgery. Although it means uprooting again, we look forward to heading to Melbourne as a family and experiencing life in another country. The only downside is the alarming number of Australians there. I hope to return to Auckland and hopefully get a job doing pediatric orthopedics in either Middlemore or Starship. But after all these years of training, it is a very real possibility that I may not be able to get a job. Government funding is limited and surgeons don't seem to be retiring at the rate that new ones are being trained. Jobs in the main centres are scarce and a lot of trainees face the possibility of having to move to a smaller centre to work or head overseas. I also hope in the future to be more involved in teaching or mentoring our Pacific medical students. The new medical school in Samoa is a place I would like to go and see if I can possibly help out. But for now, that all remains in the future. At the moment, I am just enjoying my job and having time to spend with my wife and my little rats without the stress of pressure of being a consultant and running a private practice. These next 2 years is a unique time, and I often hear it reflected upon as some of the most enjoyable years in the life of a surgeon. So finally, I would like to take this moment to thank Monique and Lavar for the opportunity to address you all here today. I would also like to thank the teachers, mentors and coaches I've had over the years, but most importantly my family. I owe everything to their love and support. Thank you.